Ladies, gentlemen, Roy, all right. Thank you for coming to We Don't Like That Part, so we turned it off. We turned it off. My name is William Fielder. Friends and family call me Winter. My brother's nickname is Pigeon, so maybe I got it better, I don't know. And I work for Red Hat. I'm a principal consultant for Red Hat. But let me say, I do not sell things. By the time I go to a client, they have already bought the things, and I'm there to set up the things. Although, what's real fun is if I show up and they have not bought the things, and then there's a record scratch moment. I'm a Red Hat Certified Architect Level 6, which makes my bourbon taste a little better, but doesn't cost any less. And I live in an idyllic little sailing town on the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, and I'm typically fly all over the country being sent to disconnected networks where I work on systems surrounded by grim-faced men with guns. But it all seems to work out, so we don't like that part, so we turned it off. What do I mean by that exactly? Or what should I say? What do they mean by that? Today I'm talking about a number of security tools baked into Red Hat Enterprise Linux like a fine blueberry pie. Tools that provide layers of active, audited, and excruciatingly logged protection. Tools that I routinely see written in third-party docs, blogs, manuals. First, turn it off. It being IP tables, FirewallD, SE Linux. Let's not forget the reasonably new kid FA PolicyD, and FIPS gets a very honorable mention. We'll also throw in AID, a tool that's already turned off and everyone just leaves it that way. In the salad days of RHEL 4 and 5, these pundits would say SE Linux is broken, you don't need a local firewall, it just slows your system down, and I interpret all of this to roughly mean, this sounds too hard and I don't want to deal with it. And thus, the reader turns these tools off, and perhaps now some hoodie and fox mask wearing bad guy is storing terabytes of goat porn on your servers. Malicious goat porn, with phishing links directing folks to a website that ends with singles in your area. Whenever I read a post that starts with disable Linux, I want to write to the author, I stopped reading here. Maybe your network has a nice protective shell, but turning off local security tools then provides the attacker with a nice, chewy caramel center. Speaking of protective shells, let's start with an oldie but goodie, IP tables. IP tables is a layer 3 IP packet filtering stateful firewall introduced in RHEL 4, I think. I actually haven't been able to verify that, but I'm pretty sure it was introduced in RHEL 4 among other Linux systems at the same time. At its absolute simplest, it takes incoming traffic, allows traffic through specific inbound ports, allows established traffic inbound ports, and either rejects with a reply or drops packets silently to the floor. You can also only allow specific outbound traffic as well, and flag outbound attempts through unauthorized ports. And that's basic usage. You can get far more elaborate with pre-routing, multiple tables, packet mangling, NAT, routing to new networks, you name it. You turn your RHEL box into a bona fide bells and whistles and gongs layer 3 router. I'm not going to bore you today with a full IP tables tutorial. It can provide a very thorough local firewall to your chosen server, add a layer of audited protection, and help prevent the tasty nougat center I was talking about. But wait, there's folks out there who've written endless pages on disabling firewall IP tables. It's unnecessary overhead if you have a properly maintained network firewall. It hits your CPU hard and slows your server down. It can be hard to read and maintain even for experienced administrators. I already commented on the hard shell and the chewy center. In a properly maintained network, you have traffic divided into subnets. Your local system IP tables can be configured to accept input from everywhere, or only from certain internal subnets, or even just a small range of whitelisted internal administrative addresses. Segmentation, layers, that's what security is all about, right? Multiple lines of defense. Attackers who get past the moat get a face full of oil and arrows that are on fire. IP tables does, in fact, hit your CPU depending on the sheer amount of traffic and how Byzantine your rules are. The vast majority of humans will not notice the extra time taken except perhaps a server that is publicly available on the internet, such as a DMZ web server. However, if you're receiving such an input volume that IP tables is naked eye noticeably slowed down, IP tables is most likely not your problem. At that point, you introduce load balancing, caching, and other availability enhancements. As for being hard to read, I'll counter that a properly written IP tables configuration file can read almost like English. Note, the file is read in order from top to bottom by the system. The moment incoming traffic matches a line, either allow or deny the traffic is dealt with. Make sure the last line denies anything that hasn't been allowed. Side note, for a very, very lively and entertaining exercise, write a file that allows everything that has not been denied and log all of it. You really get to know your incoming traffic very well. Don't do this for valuable production systems unless you really like that living on the edge feeling. FirewallD was introduced in RHEL 7, originally a front end for IP tables, but now NF tables. FirewallD introduces the concept of zones, although zones could be reproduced in IP tables with appropriate chains, but that can get ugly fast. Folks will still say turn off FirewallD because it's hard, messy, slows your system down, I don't like it. Are we starting to notice a trend here? 99% of the time, you will basically use FirewallD on a server to roughly do this. Take traffic from this or these networks, input them into this zone allowed through these ports, output them through that zone. Make it permanent. When you're done testing, reload. For example, if you want to allow anyone to access your web server, you just allow all networks through public zone on port 80 and or 443, done. Unfettered access to the server over all ports, add the chosen network to the trusted zone, done. If you want to block a network, direct all traffic from that subnet to the drop or reject zone, done. So reject will actually send a reply back to the bad network. Drop just silently drops it on the floor, and that's most of the time that's what you want to do. Red Hat even provides a number of pre-rolled FirewallD services that you can allow or deny, such as Red Hat Satellite 6. Allowing the service opens all ports required for satellite or on your chosen zone. So again, say you're using Identity Manager. There's a whole bunch of ports that have to be open for IDM, and instead of having to specifically open all of those ports by themselves, you just say allow IDM service. Poof, it opens everything you need. You don't need to worry about it anymore. If you have deeper, scarier, darker firewall needs, then FirewallD allows for the creation of what are called rich rules. With rich rules, you can go to town like that Muppet animal on his drum set, but you got to be careful with rich rules because they can truly get real ugly really fast, and you have to bring the robed wizards to come in to look at it. If you forget how to do something, the command firewall-command tac help will print out every possible option in headache-inducing detail. Odds are you can just grep for the keyword you want. Can't remember how to set a default zone? Just look for default, and there it is in a much smaller sea of information. Most Red Hat products flat out tell you exactly what firewall command options to run, and then you can largely just forget about it. But someone's monitoring the logs, right? right? Because you can do all this firewalling and denying, and if no one's actually paying attention to the logs, well, really, what's the point? But wait, it gets worse. It gets worse. Starting with RHEL 4, with tapes, bolts, and gum, we have SE Linux. Oh boy. SE Linux was met with a great gnashing of teeth and rending of garments. I will absolutely agree if you don't know how SE Linux works, or even better, if you don't even know SE Linux exists, like you've never even heard of it, you're going to be in for a very, very bad time. SE Linux adds kernel-level file, port, and process mandatory access controls. Simply put, all files are expected to have a file context and cannot be read or executed if they're in unexpected locations in the file system, or they're in the correct file system but have the wrong context. All network services and imports are expected to have a port context. HTTP, which traditionally runs on port 80, has a port context, HTTP_port context. If you want your web server to run on another port, it will be denied unless you approve that new port in SE Linux. You have to have SE Linux give it its blessing, you know? Say, hey, I want to run a web server on port 837. You have to tell SE Linux to allow 837, otherwise it's going to go, no, not doing it. Administrators who are used to running services on non-standard ports or placing system files in non-standard locations are suddenly met with a very upset system that will do nothing, log angry and thorough alerts, and most likely unceremoniously die. Casters up, as I like to say. SE Linux, it had a rocky start on RHEL 4 and 5 as everyone was getting used to it, including us. But now in the heated garden of RHEL 8 and 9 and 10, it really works. Really, honestly, it just works out of the box unless you're doing really crazy, weird things with your system. SE Linux not only prevents malicious programs to run or read in unapproved contexts, it also expects a sanely configured system. It leans over, taps you on the shoulder, and asks you, why are you doing this to me? And it's almost always asking you to do the right thing. It expects you to put your house in order, everything in its place, properly labeled and free of dust and contaminants. It doesn't just help against attackers, it helps against you on your bad days. A file context is divided into 4 fields: object, object user, object role, context type, and classification level. If you type ls-l_z, it'll show you all of SE Linux's special fields. On a side note, the -Z for SE Linux will apply to, let's say you don't use SE Linux, but you're using some other file system or kernel level security tool. The -Z will then show you its options. So that is like the common accepted switch to show whatever kernel security you have to list it out into your files. For the file contexts, 99% of the time, you're only going to worry about the third field of the context type. The first 2 fields are mostly, I'll touch on it, automagically handled by the operating system. And the 4th field, classification levels, that really only applies to environments that have strict document classification levels, such as black ops sites in unmapped North Dakota repurposed missile silos. I have, another side note, this is going to sound like I'm thumping my chest and bragging. I'm not. I actually intend it to be depressing. Within Red Hat, I am considered a worldwide expert in SE Linux, and it's because no one cares. It's not because I'm necessarily that good. It's because no one, even in Red Hat, Red Hatters don't care about it that much. So it's like you're playing a game of 8-ball and you win because your opponent scratches, not because you actually sunk the 8-ball, you know? And this leading up to, I have never once been to a single client that used classification levels. And I'm like, man, I'd really like to try playing with that at some point. I feel almost sad. But what can you do? SE Linux expects web pages to be stored in var www HTML out of the box on Red Hat, on RHEL. It might be different on other variants. That directory and everything placed under it has the file context http:/sys_content_t. If you want to publish files from, say, var www rabbits, you have to ensure that location and everything under it also has that same HTTP context. It's the same with ports. I already talked about this. Web servers typically publish over ports 80 and 443, which SE Linux is configured to expect right from the get-go. You don't have to do anything to allow that. If you want to publish over port 666, you have to tell SE Linux it's okay. Note that SE Linux does not care about who is executing or reading a file. It has no concept of users, not even the root user. Its concern is that all the files are in the right place and all the ports follow the Internet Service Standards unless exceptions are specifically made. But there's a little bit of a lie there. You can specify special SE Linux user and role types and assign those types to system users. But out of the box, that is not configured out of the box, and the vast majority of SE Linux users out there will never care about setting up their own special roles or user types. And even then, SE Linux still doesn't care who you are. It just, if you have that magic role flag, okay, you're allowed to do this. And SE Linux, finally, also has a whole long list of booleans that you can turn on or turn off. And you type get SE bool tac A, and it shows you the whole list and whether they're on or off. And that way you can add little modifications to how SE Linux is running under the hood. And say you want users to be allowed to publish web content out of their home directories. Out of the box, that's not allowed. You have to set the boolean for it's HTTP allow home dir, I believe. And you just say turn that on, set it to permanent, and then, okay, users are allowed to publish web content from their home directories. Trying to explain the whole list of booleans would be a ridiculous amount of time here, but it's a long list, but you can really just say, allow these, don't allow these, and it really just works. I'd say SE Linux is a solved problem at this point, and the naysayers really should give it another try, but wait, it gets worse. FA policy D. Red Hat's new word for pain is FA policy D, the new kid on the block that everyone tells you to disable, and yet there's something darker here. Red Hat's own documentation for Ansible Automation Platform 2.6, which was just released, tells you to disable or set to permissive FA policy D. Let me stress that again. We tell you in our own documentation for one of our own products to disable or set to permissive FA policy D. Oh my God, what kind of signal does this give to our users? Sorry, Red Hat, I'm allowed to roast you a little bit. I will concede FA policy D still needs to have some lumps in the carpet beaten flat with a stick, but let's talk about what it actually does. File access policy daemon. A simple application, allow listing daemon for Linux as GitHub. I also quote from Red Hat's documentation, setting and enforcing a policy that either allows or denies application execution based on a rule set efficiently preventing the execution of unknown and potentially malicious software. You know, I bet that sounded like, what is that actually doing? You basically, in a nutshell, with FA policy D, you allow these users are allowed to run these files and these users aren't. For example, if you have the GCC compiler installed, you could tell FA policy D, only this guy is allowed to run GCC on this system. No one else is allowed to. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're root, doesn't matter. Only if you're logged in as him can you run GCC. Part of the fun of FA Policy D is that while it works perfectly out of the box and does exactly what it says on the tin, it's not enabled by default unless you apply a STIG at install time. You can also enable it. You can have a running system and enable it too. And while it's baked into RHEL from the start, unlike SE Linux's rocky beginnings, we didn't really announce its inclusion unless you pay attention to the release notes, and everybody reads the release notes, right? Thus, you enable a STIG, and FA Policy D is silently enabled, and suddenly a bunch of applications and files that you've run flawlessly for years just suddenly stop working, and you don't know why, and you call up support, and they say, did you check FA Policy D? And you say, did I check what? And because like you might not have even heard that FA Policy D exists. So I think where SE Linux had a rocky, buggy start, but we got it fixed, FA Policy D works flawlessly and no one knows about it because it's not really advertised. And even when you enable a STIG, it doesn't magically tell you, oh, by the way, we just turned FA Policy D on. I guess if you read the fine print a little bit, but again, who's reading the fine print, right? FA Policy D is all about, do you trust the software that you're running and the user running it? An administrator creates a set of rules that allows or denies the execution of applications based on path, hash, MIME type, or trust, especially trust. Remember, SE Linux only cares about that the executable applications are in the correct location with the correct file context. It doesn't know or care anything about users. FA Policy D is all about the user. An executable can be in the right location according to SE Linux, but FA Policy D might still deny it if the logged in user is not allowed to run it. On the flip side, you could configure FA Policy D to allow an application in a non-standard path, but then SE Linux will deny it because the file context is wrong. Let's take the time-honored ls command, provided by the core utils RPM, expected to be run from the bin directory. As a standard RHEL command, it is inherently trusted to run from bin ls by any user of this system. But what if an attacker places their own ls in temp? If you try to run the temp ls, FA Policy D tests it against the rules and says, nope, not allowed to run from temp. You can also configure FA Policy D to allow only specific users to run specific commands. You can also have it check file checksums. So when an application or a command is run, FA Policy D not only checks that that the right user is allowed to run it, that the checksum matches what it expects, and if it doesn't match, no, I'm not running that. So that way, if an attacker somehow manages to put their own version of ls into bin, so it's in the right place according to FA Policy D and according to SE Linux, FA Policy D won't let it run because the checksum doesn't match. Note, checksum tests can put a burden on the CPU, but sometimes it's absolutely necessary. Sometimes this is something you need to have turned on. FA Policy D is much like IP tables in that the first matching rule wins. The rules are read in order, and it's a bunch, you can divide FA Policy D into a bunch of little mini files too, and it reads the files in order as well. You specify by a number, you name the file with a number like 01 conf, 02 conf, and it reads them in order. So the first matching rule wins. So if a user is allowed to run a command, then that match passes even if there's a denial rule further down the file. So you have to pay close attention to the order you write your rules in. Getting FA Policy D just right can absolutely be a time-consuming and hair-pulling, but it adds a very strict layer of control on who is allowed to run what and from where on your systems. How about a Red Hat provided tool that's already turned off out of the box. You have to explicitly turn it on, and odds are that if you do, it's going to lead you down a rabbit hole full of misery. Thankfully, I also happen to be a subject matter expert in rabbit holes, so let's see what we have going on here. AID, Advanced Intrusion Detection Environment. How many of you fine folks have heard of the concept of tripwiring? There you go. Also, a fine company, so I hear. AID is Red Hat's Claymore mine of choice, although it's disabled by default in a vanilla RHEL installation. The daring amongst us decide to turn it on, and you're met with a wall of warning messages that someone is doing something horrible to your files. Little does AID know that it's you. Yes, you prince among malcontents. AID requires careful tuning to monitor just the things you want it, and you ignore the rest. Oh boy, you can configure AID to watch for changes in a file or directory ownership, permissions, size, access modification times, SE Linux context, and again, checksum hashes, which is great for directories like bin, sbin, and etc, directories and files you don't expect to change without you explicitly change it. So you want to set AID to watch bin, sbin, user sbin, etc. If something just randomly changes in etc, you want to know, unless you're the one who did it, right? Having AID monitor temp or var will lead to ashes in the hair, cursing the heavens of your choice, all that good stuff, which leads us back to tuning. You edit etc AID, aid.conf, and specify exactly which directories and files you want to monitor and which attributes. For example, you can have AID check for changes made within any file in etc. Someone modified named.conf, you'll get a warning. Or let's say the ownership or hash checksum of bin GCC changed. That's something that should not happen outside of a system update. AID lets you know in no uncertain terms there's no funny business going on and you'd better investigate it. Now, AID doesn't prevent anything. So it'll be monitoring for file size changes or ownership changes if something runs, and it'll let you know, but it doesn't actually stop it from doing it. It doesn't actually prevent anything from happening. It alerts you. Keep in mind, if you're running a system update, you have to tell AID that things have changed and it's all your fault. AID will forgive you. Also note that both AID and FA policy will check for file hashes. Having both do the same tests will put a notable drag in your system, so you should pick one. So either have FA policy do checksum tests or have AID do checksum tests. Don't have them both doing it. Otherwise, that will go back to you will see a naked eye slowdown. I personally, if I'm using both, I personally have FA policy do hash checking, because AID won't stop it. It'll just alert you. FA policy will actually stop it. We'll say, no, I'm not running that. But wait. The final doom for the hardened RHEL security veteran, another one of those little tools that will really bite you if you don't know how it works, or worse, don't even know it exists. FIPS mode. For RHEL's purposes, it's only about approved cryptographic algorithms and tamper-resistant hardware. Hold on, you did install the operating system with FIPS mode enabled right from the start? No, then you're only 99% compliant. When you install RHEL, if you want the system to be FIPS enabled, you have to have it enabled from one of the kernel options right at install time. If you can enable FIPS after the fact, but then since you weren't enabled the entire time, there are certain things that just don't get switched. And there are some security scanners will say your system is not really FIPS compliant because it wasn't compliant from install time. 100% FIPS compliance requires it to be enabled from the very start. Heaven help you if you want to enable it after your system is already installed. Extra good luck if you're, say, using satellite server or IDM, because they will both dig deep pits, give you a mournful look and dive in, and they somehow manage to pull the dirt in behind them. Seriously, you do not have to run FIPS mode with either satellite server or IDM, but you have to choose right from the beginning if you're going to do it. If you're running satellite without it and then turn it on, satellite is going to croak on you and be, what are you doing, and just die. And interesting with IDM, if you had it disabled and you've got IDM running and then you enable it, not only will it break IDM, even if you disable it, IDM stays broken. So unless you have a good backups, you're reinstalling IDM at that point. So you've got good backups, right? And yet, FIPS mode, by enforcing strict cryptographic standards and tamper alerting hardware, adds another useful layer to your fortress of solitude. So yes, the tamper proofing, if the hardware supports it, so it has to be in the hardware that, like the server that you're building, FIPS will detect if the system's opened up. If someone's cracked the shell, you'll get alerted. Just like AID, FIPS won't actually stop it, but you will get alerted, hey, someone just opened up your server, man. You might want to look at that. So how do all of these tools I've talked about here work together? FirewallD allows or denies external network connections based on source address, destination address, port, and which services are running on those ports. SE-Linux expects all directories, files, and network ports to be properly defined and labeled. Books are on the bookshelf, teaspoons in the kitchen drawer, and not the other way around. FA Policy D allows only trusted applications to run based on who is running the application and where it is run from, and if it matches a known good file size and checksum hash. Rolling back to FA Policy D real quick, so I said you have trusted software and trusted users. You allow users to run it, and then you have software that's allowed to run. If you install stuff on RHEL from our repositories, it's just trusted out of the box. You don't have to do anything. If you go out and download from somewhere else and compile it yourself, make your own RPM or whatever and install it in the system, that will not be automatically trusted, and FA Policy is going to go, what are you doing? I'm at a client now, assigned to a client now who will remain nameless. So we provide a product called JBoss that you can buy, get a subscription for and install. They downloaded it from somewhere else, not from us. And they wanted to use FA Policy D, and it shouted at them and said, what are you doing? And I'm like, why didn't you download it from our, because, sorry, Red Hat, we can be a bit conservative in our release cycle. You know, versions might be a little farther back than people might want in some environments. So they wanted to get a newer, shinier, flashier version of JBoss from elsewhere. And of course, that just didn't work out for anybody. But I'll continue. FIPS mode expects all encryption, such as SSH and GNU PG, to use approved cryptographic modules and implement tamper alerting hardware. It affects things like SSL. Anything that has to do, anything that interacts with the cryptography of your system is affected by FIPS mode. Attempting to access a public zone web page over port 80 with published content in var www HTML with the file context HTTP syscontent T and port context HTTP port T, congratulations, you have a nice pretty web page in front of you. Same attempt over port 9000 with content in temp doom bucket. If you don't open your firewall port and don't tell SE-Linux about the content directory and non-standard port, you don't get the nice pictures of doom. Authorized developer, logging in to compile software with GCC, you're golden. Authorized, but GCC is not in a trusted location, you fail. Unauthorized user, but in a trusted location, you still fail. Authorized trusted location, checksum doesn't match, yet more fail. Authorized, trusted location. Checksum and size match, but SE Linux file context is wrong. Fail, but from a totally different source. Everything is configured right, but port 443 isn't opened in the firewall for your address. You can't even get into the system to fail. And if your internet packets are dropped on the floor by firewall you would never even receive a message back saying you fail. Try to SSH with a non-FIPS protocol, faceplant fail right out of the starting gate. Well, this is what we're all trying to prevent. Hopefully you've understood the gist of how each of these tools performs a viable service in securing your system. But look what happens when their powers combine. Lovely, brutal, cold layers turning many attack vectors into a fine gray ash. There's no such thing as perfect security, right? Especially where people get involved. But the withering cover fire provided by Firewall SE Linux, FA Policy, FIPS Mode, and AID, it's no joke. So turn them on, please. Thank you. Well, I'm ready to be grilled by like a fine rotisserie if anybody has any questions, comments, gripes. Drag me through the coals if you must. My spirit is ready. All right then. Oh, I'll say one more thing, not really much to do with the presentation. So I mentioned I work for Red Hat, and I've worked there for over 8 years now, and they seem to still like having me around, which is great. I like working for Red Hat. You notice there were a lot of rabbits in that slides, I imagine. My wife and I run a nonprofit rabbit rescue in Maryland, Eastern Shore Rabbit Rescue and Education Center, where we take in and rehabilitate lost, abandoned domestic pet rabbits and get them adopted back out again. So if you have any questions about Red Hat Enterprise Linux platform, satellite server, identity manager, Ansible automation platform, or the care and feeding and medical needs of pet rabbits, I'm your guy. Thank you.